I was sitting in my truck in the far corner of the parking lot at Ridgefield Internal Medicine, watching a woman I'd been married to for 16 years walk to her car with her head down, mascara ruined, phone clutch so tight in her hand that her knuckles had gone white. She didn't see me. She wasn't looking for me. She was looking over her shoulder, the way people look when they think someone is finally catching up to them. I want to tell you right now, before I take you back to where this started, that I never sent her a single message. I never left a note on her windshield. I never called her, texted her, or said one word to her about any of it until the very end. And that's the part that still surprises people when I tell this story at all, that I didn't have to do much. I just had to understand her fear better than she understood it herself, and then give that fear a little room to grow. Let's go back to March, almost a year before that parking lot. Back to the beginning, back to the version of me that still believed the woman I married was exactly who she said she was. My name is Paul Baird. I'm 45 years old, and I've spent the last 22 years as an HVAC technician here in Ridgefield, up in the western mountains of North Carolina, a town where everybody either works at the hospital, the community college, or the outdoor gear outfitters on Main Street. I fix furnaces and heat pumps and the big rooftop units on commercial buildings, and I'm good at it. I like it. There's something honest about a job where either the air moves through the ducts the way it's supposed to, or it doesn't, and you can always figure out why. My wife, Carmen, is 40. She's a physician assistant at Ridgefield Internal Medicine, a busy practice that shares a building with the regional hospital system. And for most of our marriage, I thought her job was the most impressive thing about her. She went back to school in her 30s while I was working 60-hour weeks so she could afford it. And she came out the other side, able to diagnose things and prescribe things and save people's lives in small, unglamorous ways almost every single day. I used to brag about her at the barber shop. I used to tell people my wife was smarter than both of us put together. We met at a hardware store, if you can believe that. She was buying a space heater for her apartment because her landlord wouldn't fix the furnace. And I was there picking up parts, and I told her, for free, because I'm an idiot with a crush, exactly what was wrong with her furnace and how to get her landlord to fix it under the county housing code. She laughed at me, said I sounded like a lawyer who smelled like a garage. 6 months later, we were married at the courthouse, and 4 years after that, we had our son Jesse, who is 15 now and taller than both of us and thinks his father's job is boring and his mother's job is important, which honestly most of Ridgefield thought too. I'm telling you all this because I need you to understand that I wasn't a suspicious husband. I wasn't the kind of man who checked phones or timed drives to the grocery store. I trusted Carmen without thinking about it, because trust had simply always been there. That started to change in March. It was small things first. She started going to more CME conferences, continuing medical education, the classes she needed to keep her license current. That part wasn't unusual. She'd always gone to a few a year. What was unusual was that she started going to more of them on weekends instead of weekdays. And she started coming home from them a little different, quieter. She'd shower the second she walked in the door, before she even said hello to Jesse, before she even put her bag down. She started keeping her phone face down on the counter, then face down and locked in a drawer. Then eventually, she just started taking it into the bathroom with her. I noticed fast, and I think it's important for anyone watching this who's in a similar spot. You notice faster than you let yourself admit. I noticed and I told myself 100 different stories that weren't the true one. She's stressed. The practice merged with the hospital system last year, and everybody's overworked. She's 40 and self-conscious about her body, and that's why she showers right away. I built her a whole alibi in my head because the alternative was something I didn't want to know. The thing that finally cracked it open wasn't dramatic. It was a Thursday in June. I was doing a service call at Ridgefield General, the hospital that owns the practice Carmen works for, replacing a failed compressor on a rooftop unit above the west wing. I'd been in and out of that building for 15 years doing HVAC work. Half the nursing staff knew me by name, brought me coffee, asked about Jesse's baseball season. I was walking down a back stairwell that connects the mechanical floor to the second floor offices, the kind of stairwell nobody uses because it's faster to take the elevator. And I heard my wife's voice before I saw her. She wasn't alone. "You can't keep doing this to me, Anthony," she said. Her voice had a rawness in it I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "You said after the merger. You said once Lyle finished the transition." I know what I said. A man's voice low and controlled, the voice of somebody used to being calm. "Carmen, it's not that simple. Leona's mother just moved in with us. I can't exactly announce I'm leaving my marriage while my mother-in-law is unpacking boxes in my guest room." I stood 2 flights above them, one hand on a cold metal railing, and I didn't breathe. "There's always a mother-in-law," Carmen said. "There's always a reason. I'm not asking you to announce anything. I'm asking you to stop looking at me like I'm the only thing keeping you sane and then going home every night to her. That's not fair." "None of this is fair, Anthony." She paused, and I heard something that might have been her laughing, the kind of laugh that isn't happy. "I used to think fair was the whole point of my job. Do you know how funny that is now?" I didn't hear the rest. I turned around and walked back up the stairs, out through the mechanical floor, past a nurse named Denise who asked me if the AC would be fixed before the heat wave, and I told her, "Yes, ma'am, working on it now," in a voice that came out steadier than I had expected. Let's introduce Anthony. Dr. Anthony Montgomery was the head physician at Ridgefield Internal Medicine, Carmen's boss, a man in his early 50s with the kind of gray-templed, golf-tanned handsomeness that made him look like he'd been cast for the role of trusted family doctor in a pharmaceutical commercial. He was married to a woman named Leona, a veterinarian who ran the animal clinic on the other side of town, well-known and well-loved, the kind of person who did free spay and neuter days for the county shelter. Leona and Anthony had been at 2 of our neighborhood cookouts. I had shaken that man's hand. I had thanked him more than once for taking such good care of my wife's career. That night I went home but didn't confront her. I watched her make dinner, watched her ask Jesse about his math test, watched her laugh at something on her phone, a laugh I now understood belonged to someone else, and I said nothing. I told myself it was because I needed to be sure, needed more than a stairwell conversation I could have half imagined in my grief. But if I'm honest with you, it wasn't only about being sure. Somewhere in that first sick, silent night, a different question had already started forming underneath the pain. What was I going to do about it? 2 nights later, I called Peter Delaney, the guy who does IT contracting for the hospital system. The closest thing I've got to a best friend since high school, I asked him to meet me at the Antler, the only bar in Ridgefield that doesn't have a television, blasting a game in every corner. I didn't plan to tell him everything, but I told him anyway, 3 beers in the flat, disbelieving voice of a man reciting someone else's bad luck. "You're sure?" Peter said, not a question so much as a man giving me one last exit ramp. "Stairwells echo weird, Paul. You're sure it was her voice?" "I've been falling asleep to that voice for 16 years, Peter. I'm sure." He was quiet for a while, turning his glass in a slow circle on the bar top. "So, what are you going to do? Lawyer? You going to confront her tonight? Tomorrow?" "I don't know yet." "That's not like you. You're the guy who diagnoses the problem in 10 minutes and fixes it in 20. This isn't a heat pump, Peter." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He looked at me sideways, the way he used to look at me right before he'd talk me out of something stupid in 11th grade. "Whatever you're thinking about doing, and I can see you thinking about something, Paul, you've got the same look you get before you tell a customer their whole system's shot. Just don't let it turn you into somebody Jesse wouldn't recognize." I told him I wouldn't. At the time I believed it. I want you to know that I thought, that night, that whatever I ended up doing would be small and contained and easy to live with. I didn't fully understand yet how much room there was between small and nothing, and how long a person can walk in that room without ever quite calling it revenge. Over the next several weeks I gathered what I needed. I tried to keep busy, tried not to let my mind wander too much, so I fixed things instead. I replaced a water heater for the Hendersons 2 streets over, and I recalibrated a thermostat for the elementary school. I coached Jesse's summer league team on Wednesday nights. And underneath all of it, in the part of my brain that used to just worry about refrigerant pressure, I was building something else. There was one night about 4 weeks in when I almost threw the whole quiet plan away. Carmen came home late from a provider dinner, smelling faintly of a restaurant I recognized from one of the credit card charges. And she kissed my cheek on her way past me at the sink, the way she'd done 10,000 times before, easy and unthinking, and something in me just cracked. I set the dish I was drying down on the counter harder than I meant to. "Long dinner," I said. She turned around, and for 1 second I thought she might have heard something in my voice, some crack in the floor she hadn't expected. "Anthony wanted to go over the new intake protocols. It ran long. I'm sorry, I should have texted." I looked at her the way I hadn't let myself in weeks, and every part of my body wanted to say, I know Carmen, I know about Anthony, I know about the inn 2 counties over, and the hotel key card on the nightstand, and the way you say his name like it costs you something. It was right there in my throat for maybe 4 full seconds. It's fine, I said instead. There's a plate for you in the microwave. She thanked me and went to shower. I stood in the kitchen with my hands flat on the counter until my heart stopped slamming. I told myself the same thing I'd been telling myself for a month. Not yet. Not until I understand what I'm actually protecting by staying quiet, and what I'm willing to let go of by staying quiet too long. Not confronting her that night is a decision I've turned over more than any other in this whole story. Some days I think it was the most disciplined thing I've ever done. Other days I think I was simply a coward with a good cover story. And the cover story was called strategy. I don't know that I'll ever fully settle which one is true. Maybe it was both. I found, over the weeks that followed, the hotel charges on a credit card statement she thought I didn't look at closely, 5 of them over the better part of a year. Always at a boutique inn 2 counties over. Always billed the same Thursday she claimed to be at a provider wellness retreat. I found, through our shared family cloud backup, that neither of us had ever bothered to turn off. A string of photos that had synced automatically from her phone before she'd learned to disable it. Nothing explicit, just 2 people's hands on a restaurant table, a hotel key card on a nightstand, Anthony Montgomery's unmistakable profile caught by accident in the corner of a mirror selfie she'd meant to send to no one but herself. Not a case exactly, not evidence for a divorce lawyer, though I'd eventually need that too. I was building an understanding of exactly what my wife was most afraid of losing, because I had decided somewhere around week 3, on a night I sat in the driveway for 40 minutes before I could make myself go inside, that I didn't want to be the one who took it from her. I wanted her to be the one who dropped it. Here's what I understood about Carmen after 18 years of loving her and 6 weeks of watching her from the outside for the first time in my life. She had built her entire adult identity out of being the person who did things right. She'd clawed her way through PA school in her 30s, while other people her age were already senior in their careers. She had a reputation at that practice for being thorough, careful, the one the nurses trusted with the complicated cases. She was terrified, genuinely structurally terrified, of being seen as someone who cut corners, who broke rules, who let anyone down. That fear was the thing that made her good at her job. It was also, I realized, the exact lever I needed. And there was a second thing I knew, something everyone in Ridgefield's medical community knew, because it had happened 2 years before any of this, and everybody still talked about it in low voices at hospital fundraisers. The medical director over the whole system, Anthony's boss, a precise, humorless man named Lyle Galatis, had fired 2 staff members, a resident and a nurse practitioner, for an inappropriate relationship that had come to light during a routine HR review. Lyle hadn't just fired them. He'd made an example of it, brought in outside counsel, updated the entire system's conduct policy, made every single employee sit through a 2-hour training on professional boundaries in clinical settings. Carmen had told me about it herself at the time, shaking her head at the kitchen table. Lyle doesn't forgive that stuff, she'd said. He thinks it's a trust issue, not a personal one. He'll end your career over it and sleep fine that night. She had told me, with her own mouth, exactly what would destroy her. She just hadn't known she was doing it. There's one more thing I need to tell you before I get to what I actually did, because it's the piece that finally settled my nerve. In late July, I got a call from the boutique inn Carmen had been visiting. Not about her, but about a routine service contract. I did the HVAC maintenance for half the small hotels in that county, including in one of those small-town coincidences that feels almost engineered by God, that one. I was up on a ladder in the mechanical closet behind the lobby, replacing a filter, when I heard 2 familiar voices drift in from the breakfast room next door. You keep saying soon, Carmen was saying quieter than in the stairwell, tireder. You said soon in March. You said soon in May. I'm starting to think soon is just a word you use so you don't have to say never. It's not that simple, Carmen. Anthony's voice again, that same practiced calm, though I caught something underneath it this time. Irritation, the sound of a man tired of managing someone else's feelings on top of his own. You knew what this was when it started. I knew what you told me it was. I didn't know I'd still be hearing the same sentence 16 months later. What do you want me to do? Blow up 2 families in one afternoon because you've had a hard week? I want you to stop making it sound like wanting more from you is some kind of tantrum. Her voice cracked just slightly, right at the edge. I gave up things for this, Anthony. I turned down the clinical director track at the Asheville branch because it would have meant less time near you. Do you understand what I gave up for a word like soon? I heard him exhale, long and controlled, a man recalibrating. I care about you, you know that. I used to. I stood very still on that ladder with a dirty filter in my hands, and I thought, not for the first time, but for the first time with total clarity, that Anthony Montgomery was never going to leave his marriage. He wasn't cruel exactly. He was worse than cruel. He was comfortable. He had built a life where he got to keep everything: the wife, the reputation, the corner office, and Carmen too, for as long as Carmen was willing to keep being patient about a future that was never actually coming. My wife had wrecked something real to chase a man who was never going to trade his comfort for her. And some small, ugly part of me understood, standing on that ladder, that the truth was going to hurt her whether I did anything at all or not. The only choice left to me was whether she found that truth on her own timeline, dressed up as her own discovery, or on mine, dressed up as my cruelty. I chose hers. I just gave it a push in the right direction. I need to say that I didn't have a plan yet because when I've told pieces of this to people since, they sometimes want it to sound like I ran some elaborate campaign, and the truth is smaller and stranger than that. What I did was give her fear something to eat. It started small, and it started with Denise, the nurse from the mechanical floor, the one who always asked about Jesse's baseball season. I didn't lie to Denise. I never lied to a single person. What I did on a Friday afternoon 3 weeks after the stairwell was mention offhand, casual, the way you mention weather, that I'd heard through a buddy who did IT contracting for the hospital system that Lyle Galatis' office had requested an audit of communications patterns for a couple of departments after some kind of complaint. I didn't say which departments. I didn't say Carmen's name, or Anthony's. I said it the way you'd mention a rumor you didn't fully believe yourself, and I said it to Denise specifically because Denise talked to everyone, and because Denise and Carmen were friendly enough that it would reach her within the week. It reached her in 4 days. I know this because I watched my wife open a text from Denise at our kitchen table on a Tuesday night and go the color of old drywall. She excused herself to the bathroom and stayed there for 11 minutes. When she came out, she told me she had a headache and went to bed at 8:15. That was the first thing I ever did. I wouldn't lie about that. I never invented an audit that didn't exist. My buddy Peter in IT, the one I've known since high school, really had mentioned months earlier, in a completely unrelated conversation about server maintenance, that Lyle's office periodically pulled email logs for compliance reasons, the way every hospital system does. I took a true, boring, unremarkable fact, and I let it travel into a room full of guilt, where it grew teeth on its own. That was the pattern I kept to every time. I never fabricated anything that could be traced or disproven. I only ever moved true, small, ordinary facts into the places where they would land hardest. A few weeks later, I accidentally mentioned to Carmen over dinner that I'd run into Leona Montgomery at the feed store, which was true, I had, and that Leona had asked how Carmen was doing, since she seemed so stressed lately, and had said something about how she and Anthony had been having some long talks at home. I said it lightly. I said it like a husband passing along small talk. Leona had, in fact, said Carmen seemed stressed. She had not, as far as I know, said anything about long talks with Anthony about anything in particular. I let the second half sit next to the true first half and let Carmen's imagination build the bridge between them. She didn't sleep well that week. I know, because I didn't either, lying next to her, listening to her breathing change every time she thought I was asleep. I ran into Peter again around this time, at Jesse's Wednesday practice, leaning on the fence behind home plate. He watched me for a minute before he said anything. "You look like a man who's up to something," he said. "I'm not up to anything. Paul." He said my name the way he used to when we were 16, and I was about to do something stupid with his dad's truck. "I've known you since we were in Mrs. Pruitt's homeroom. You've got a face that tells on you. What are you doing?" I didn't lie to him because I've never been able to lie to Peter, and I wasn't about to start over this. "I'm not making anything up," I told him. "I'm not spreading lies about anybody. I'm just not correcting things anymore. If people draw the wrong conclusion from something true, that's not on me." Peter was quiet for a long minute, watching Jesse field a grounder at short. "That's a real fine line you're walking, brother. I know it. You sure you're walking it and not just telling yourself you are because it lets you sleep at night?" I didn't have a good answer for that. I still don't. What I told him was the truth, as I understood it then. That I'd thought about confronting her, thought about it every single day for 2 months, and every version of that confrontation in my head ended the same way, with Carmen crying, with me yelling things I couldn't take back, with Anthony Montgomery walking away from the wreckage of my marriage completely unscathed, keeping his practice and his golf handicap and his reputation as a devoted family physician, while my family was the only thing left in pieces on the floor. I didn't want that ending. I wanted an ending where the cost of what they'd done actually landed on the people who'd done it. "Just be careful," Peter said finally. "There's a version of this where you win and don't like who you turned into to get there." I told him I'd be careful. I meant it too, even while I wasn't entirely sure what careful looked like anymore. I found other threads, always true at the root, always vague enough to be about nothing at all. A friend from the billing department who'd mentioned HR had pulled some files. True, HR pulls files constantly for 100 boring reasons. An anonymous compliment I let slip about how buttoned up Lyle's office had gotten lately, about outside relationships between staff. True, they'd sent a system-wide memo reminding everyone of the conduct policy, timed to nothing but the calendar. Every rumor I ever passed along had a true bone inside it. I never once told a direct lie. I simply refused to tell her the whole truth, which was that none of it had anything to do with her, until the not knowing did the work a lie never could have. There was a Sunday in August when Jesse noticed something was wrong in the plain, unflinching way 15-year-olds sometimes see straight through the walls adults build. We were in the garage, him holding a flashlight, while I bled the coolant lines on his mom's car, and he said out of nowhere, "Is something going on with you and Mom?" I told him things were just stressful right now. Work stuff, grown-up stuff, nothing for him to worry about. He didn't push, but he looked at me for a second too long, before he went back to holding the light steady, and something about that look, my son quietly deciding not to make me lie any more than I already was, sat with me for days afterward. It was the first time the cost of what I was doing landed somewhere I hadn't accounted for. I watched her fall apart in slow motion, over about 10 weeks, and I want to tell you honestly that it was not satisfying in the way I'd expected revenge to feel. It was more like watching a building I used to love slowly take on water. She stopped sleeping. She started double and triple checking her charting, staying 2 extra hours at the practice most nights re-reviewing patient notes she'd already reviewed, because some part of her had convinced herself that if anyone came looking for a reason to end her career, she needed her professional record to be spotless, even while the personal one was rotting. The turn, the real turn, the one I never engineered and never could have, came on a Thursday in September when Carmen came home early at 2 in the afternoon. I was there because I'd finished a job ahead of schedule. She didn't know I was home. I heard her in the bedroom on the phone before I made a sound. "I can't do this anymore, Anthony." Her voice was shaking in a way I hadn't heard since Jesse was born, and something had gone wrong for 4 terrible minutes before it went right. "Everyone is talking. Do you understand that? Denise is talking. The billing girls are talking. I saw Lyle's assistant looking at me funny in the hallway on Monday, and I nearly threw up in a supply closet." There was a pause. I couldn't hear Anthony's side, only the shape of Carmen reacting to it. No, you don't get to tell me to calm down. You have a marriage to protect. I have a license. Do you understand the difference? If this comes out, Leona divorces you, and you keep your medical degree and your reputation as the poor, betrayed husband. If this comes out, I lose my job, I lose my license, I lose everything I spent my 30s clawing toward, and Paul. Her voice broke on my name in a way that still, even now, does something complicated to my chest. Paul finds out in the worst possible way instead of hearing it from me, which I should have done months ago, and I am too much of a coward to do. There was another pause, longer. "I'm not doing the retreat next month," she said. "I'm not doing any of it anymore. I need you to hear me. This is done, Anthony. It has to be done." I stood in the hallway outside our bedroom door, with my hand flat against the wall, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. I felt grief instead of triumph. I had wanted this. I had built toward this for 10 weeks, with a patience that frightened me a little, Looking back, and when it finally arrived, it didn't feel like winning. It felt like watching someone you love set fire to a house you used to live in together, even knowing she was the one who'd let the fire start. I didn't go in. I went back out to my truck, sat in the driveway, and let myself feel all of it. The relief, the grief, the cold satisfaction underneath both, before I went back inside and asked her, in a normal voice, if she wanted help with dinner. The end of the affair wasn't clean. I don't want to pretend it was for the sake of a tidier story. Anthony Montgomery didn't go quietly. 2 days after that phone call, Carmen came home from work rattled in a different way. Angry this time, not afraid. He told me I was being paranoid, she told me that night, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, not knowing I already understood exactly why she was telling me any of this at all, dressing it up as generic work stress the way she'd been doing for months. He said nobody's investigating anything, that I imagined the whole thing, that I panicked over gossip and ruined something good because I couldn't handle pressure. I asked her carefully what she'd said back. I told him that if it was nothing, he wouldn't have spent over a year lying to his wife about a golf retreat every time we went to that inn. She looked down at her hands. I told him I was done being someone's secret, especially a secret that apparently wasn't even worth protecting once it got hard. I didn't say anything. She had just confessed her affair without realizing it. She was so angry, she just kept talking. I sat there and listened. What none of us knew, what I found out much later, secondhand, the way you find out most things in a town the size of Ridgefield, was that Leona Montgomery hadn't needed an anonymous rumor to notice her husband had become someone she didn't recognize. She'd filed for divorce herself in October, for reasons she never made public, though the timing tells its own story. I heard through the same slow-moving current of small-town gossip that had once carried my own careful half-truths, that she'd found a receipt of her own months earlier, a different inn maybe, or the same one. I never learned which and had simply been waiting, with a patience I recognized uncomfortably well, for the right moment to act on it. Anthony's contract with the practice wasn't renewed the following spring, officially due to restructuring, though Lyle Galotis, I'm told, doesn't renew contracts for reasons he doesn't fully believe himself, and a man who loses both his marriage and his medical director's confidence in the same 6 months tends to find fewer people willing to vouch for him at the next place he lands. I never engineered Leona's suspicion, and I never engineered whatever led Lyle to quietly decide not to keep Anthony on. Fear does that on its own, once it's been given a running start. All I ever did was give Carmen's fear a running start of its own and let it run toward the truth that was already there, waiting for her to trip over it. Carmen confessed to me in full 3 weeks after that phone call, on a Sunday night after Jesse had gone to bed. We were sitting at the kitchen table where we'd eaten 10,000 dinners together. She had her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she never drank, just held for the warmth. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to let me get through all of it before you say anything. Because if you say anything, I might lose my nerve." I told her, okay. I sat with my hands flat on the table, the same way I'd stood in the kitchen that night in June, and I let her talk. She told me she'd been having an affair with Anthony Montgomery for 16 months. She told me it started slow, an emotional thing during a hard stretch at the practice, feeling unseen by everyone, including me, and became a physical thing before she'd fully admitted to herself what it was. She told me about the wellness retreats that weren't retreats, about the inn 2 counties over, about a version of her own life she'd built in secret rooms while I stood in the kitchen of the real one, wondering why she seemed so far away. "I kept telling myself I'd stop," she said. "Every single time, I told myself this was the last time, and then something would happen. A bad day, a good day, it didn't even matter which. I'd find a reason it was different this time." She looked up at me with wet eyes, her mascara already gone from crying earlier that night in the bathroom, the same mascara I'd watched run down her face in a parking lot months later, though neither of us knew that yet. "I don't have a version of this that makes me sound like a good person, Paul. I know that. Do you remember the night you came home so angry? You said Anthony said nobody's investigating anything, that you imagined the whole thing, that you panicked over gossip and ruined something good because you couldn't handle pressure. That's the night you confessed, without really knowing you confessed. So tell me, why are you telling me now?" I asked her, and I want you to know that question wasn't a trap. I really wanted to hear her answer. "Because it's over," she said. "It ended a few weeks ago, and it ended badly. And for the first time in over a year, I woke up one morning, and the first thing I thought about wasn't him. It was you. It was Jesse. It was how much I'd built a whole secret life, instead of just being honest that I was drowning and needed help. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I'm telling you, because I want us to survive this, or because I just can't carry the lie for one more day. Maybe both. I don't know. She cried in a way I'd only seen twice before in 18 years of marriage. Once when her father died. Once in the hospital hallway during the 4 terrible minutes before Jesse's first cry. And she asked me whether there was any version of us that could survive this. I told her the truth, which is more or less the only thing I have left to give her that I hadn't already given away in pieces over the summer. I told her I loved who she used to be, and I told her I didn't fully know who she was anymore. I told her that even if I could forgive the affair, and some nights I thought maybe I could, I didn't know if I could ever again trust a version of her that had lied to my face for 16 months while I coached our son's baseball team and fixed the neighbor's water heater, and had no idea my whole life had a hole cut in the bottom of it. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked. "Anything at all?" "I don't know yet," I told her. That was the truest thing I said to her all night. I need time to figure out what's actually left standing. I filed for divorce in November. It wasn't a dramatic filing. There were no screaming matches, no thrown plates, nothing you'd see in a movie. Carmen didn't fight it. I think some part of her understood, even without knowing what I'd done, that something had shifted between us that summer that had nothing to do with forgiveness and everything to do with a man quietly, finally, deciding what he needed for himself. She never found out about the rumors. I've thought hard, over the 2 years since, about whether I owe her that truth, and I've decided, for now at least, that I don't. What I did wasn't cruelty for its own sake. I never fabricated a lie. I never hurt Leona or used her pain as a tool. If anything, my clumsy, honest mention of her at the feed store turned out to be nothing next to whatever she discovered on her own. I never told Lyle Galatis a single word, true or false. I simply understood my wife well enough after 18 years to know that the truth, even scattered in small, true pieces, even without a single lie attached, would eventually be heavier than the lie she was living. I didn't destroy her affair. I just stopped protecting her from the weight of it. Jesse split his time between us for a year before Carmen moved into a condo closer to the practice where she still works. Quieter now, more careful, though I don't know if that carefulness is guilt or just age. I see her at his games sometimes. We're civil. We're even on our better days, something close to kind to each other. I think about that stairwell more than I'd like to admit. I think about how close I came to walking down instead of up, to slamming open that door and screaming at both of them right there on the mechanical floor. I think it would have felt good for about 90 seconds. I don't think it would have taught either of them anything about the size of what they'd risked. Sometimes the truest consequence isn't the one you hand someone, it's the one you let them build for themselves, out of their own fear, in their own time, with materials they already had lying around the house. If you're watching this because you're standing where I was standing, in a hallway you shouldn't be in, holding a phone charging cord instead of your usual midnight glass of water, listening to something you were never supposed to hear, I want to tell you 2 things. The first is, gather the truth before you act on the feeling. I spent 6 weeks being sure before I did anything at all, and in that time, I learned things about my wife's fear and about my own patience that I never would have understood if I'd confronted her in that stairwell. Slow down. You'll see more clearly than you think you can. The second is harder to hear, so I'll say it plainly. Revenge, even the quiet kind, even the kind where you never tell a single lie, doesn't heal you. It didn't heal me. What healed me slowly over 2 years I'm still not finished with was a good therapist, my son's baseball season, and finally learning to sit in a quiet house without needing to fill it with anger. If you're in the middle of something like this, please don't let the plan become the whole of you, the way it almost became the whole of me. Get support. Talk to someone. Let the people who love you help carry it, because I promise you, you were never meant to carry it alone in a truck in a parking lot, waiting for someone else's fear to finally catch up with them. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. If this story found something true in you, hit subscribe and leave a comment. It will help others open up. Thank you for staying. I'd be honored to have you back for the next one. Take care, and God bless.